The room was quiet, almost too quiet. The faint hum of the space station's systems filled the air, a constant reminder that they were far from Earth, or any planet for that matter. Around the large circular table, representatives from two very different species sat stiffly in their seats. On one side were humans, dressed in simple uniforms of blue and gray. Across from them were the Xylothians, their tall, insect-like forms draped in shimmering robes that seemed to ripple like liquid metal. John Carter leaned forward slightly, his fingers resting on the edge of the table. He was a man in his late 40s, with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. As the lead negotiator for humanity, he carried the weight of billions on his shoulders. Beside him sat Emily Dawson, a young linguist whose job was to translate the complex clicks and whistles of the Xylothian language into something humans could understand. Her notebook was already filled with scribbled notes, her pen moving quickly as she tried to keep up with the subtle nuances of the conversation. At the center of the table floated a holographic display showing the disputed regions of space where countless battles had been fought over the years. The map glowed softly, its colors shifting between red and blue to represent areas controlled by each side. It looked peaceful enough now, but everyone in the room knew better. Those lines had been drawn in blood. "We seek only an end to this conflict," said Ziller, the Xylothian spokesperson. His voice came through as a series of chirps and buzzes, translated into English by a small device clipped to Emily's collar. "Our people grow weary of war. Surely you feel the same." John nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Of course we do. But actions speak louder than words. We need guarantees, actions that show your commitment to peace." Ziller tilted his elongated head, the movement making him look even more alien. "And what guarantees would satisfy you, human? Shall we dismantle our fleets entirely? Leave ourselves defenseless?" Emily glanced at John, sensing the tension rising. She cleared her throat gently. "Perhaps we can start smaller. Trade agreements, cultural exchanges, steps toward trust." The Xylothian's antennae twitched, a gesture Emily had learned signaled either amusement or irritation. It was hard to tell which. "Trust must be earned," Zyler replied smoothly. "But I admit, such measures could pave the way." As the discussion continued, Admiral Ryan Mitchell watched silently from a nearby observation deck. His arms were crossed tightly over his chest, and his jaw was clenched. A seasoned military leader, he didn't trust these talks, not for a second. Behind the polished words and diplomatic gestures, he saw only delay tactics. Every instinct told him the Xylothians were planning something. "Sir," came a quiet voice beside him. It was Captain Laura Bennett, one of his most trusted officers. She held a datapad in her hand, her brow furrowed. "We've picked up unusual activity near the border. Ships moving into position. Looks like they're preparing for something big." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "Keep it quiet for now," he said firmly. "If they think we know, it might push them to act prematurely." Laura nodded but hesitated before leaving. "Do you really believe they'll honor this treaty if it happens?" Mitchell didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned back to the window, watching the delegates below. They looked so small against the vastness of space. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and grim. "I don't know, but I'm not taking any chances." Back in the meeting room, Emily caught John's eye. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. For all the uncertainty hanging in the air, there was still hope. At least that's what she told herself. Little did they know, events were already spiraling out of control, and peace was the last thing on anyone's mind. The negotiations dragged on for hours, each side carefully choosing their words as if one misstep could shatter the fragile calm. Emily Dawson sat with her pen poised over her notebook, trying to focus on the conversation. But something felt off. Zylar, the Xylothian spokesperson, seemed almost too eager to agree with every suggestion John Carter made. His smooth responses and quick compromises were unsettling, like a predator pretending to be harmless. John noticed it too. He leaned back in his chair, studying Zillar with a thoughtful frown. "You're very accommodating today," he said finally, his tone casual but probing. "It's almost surprising after all the resistance we faced before." Zillar's antennae twitched again, that same gesture Emily still couldn't quite read. "We wish only to move forward," he replied, his voice steady through the translator. "The suffering of our people grows with each passing day. Surely you understand this." Emily glanced at John, who gave no outward reaction. She scribbled a note in the margin of her pad. "Too cooperative." Meanwhile, aboard the human fleet stationed just outside the neutral zone, Admiral Ryan Mitchell paced the bridge of his flagship. The reports from Captain Laura Bennett weighed heavily on his mind. Ships moving into position, weapons being prepped. It all pointed to one thing: preparation for war. And yet, here they were, sitting across a table from the enemy, talking about peace. "Sir," Laura said, stepping closer to him. Her face was pale, her usual confidence shaken. "I've analyzed their movements more closely. They're not just fortifying their borders. Some of those ships are heading toward sectors we thought were secure." Mitchell stopped pacing and turned to face her. His expression was grim. "Which sectors?" She hesitated, then answered quietly, "Colonies. Outer colonies near the edge of contested space." A muscle in Mitchell's jaw tightened. Those colonies were home to millions of civilians, families, farmers, workers who had no idea what might be coming. If the Tylothians struck there, it would be devastating. He clenched his fists, torn between acting on instinct and waiting for proof. Back on the station, Emily found herself alone for a moment during a short break in the talks. She wandered to a large viewport overlooking the stars, trying to clear her head. As she gazed out at the endless expanse of space, she noticed something strange, a faint flicker of light in the distance. At first, she thought it was a trick of her eyes, but then it happened again. Movement. Ships, perhaps. Her heart began to race. Quickly, she pulled out her communicator and contacted the human fleet. "This is Emily Dawson. I'm on the station, and I think I see activity near the border. Can someone confirm?" Static crackled before a voice responded. "Stand by, ma'am. We're checking now." Moments later, Laura's voice came through. "Ms. Dawson, thank you for reporting that. We're picking up additional movement consistent with your observation. Stay safe. We'll keep you updated." Emily ended the call and took a deep breath. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. She hurried back to the meeting room, where John was already seated, waiting for the session to resume. She leaned down and whispered urgently, "There's something going on out there. More ships. I don't think they're staying put." John's eyes narrowed. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be without seeing it directly," she whispered back. "But it feels wrong. Too convenient." John nodded slowly, his mind racing. He glanced at Zillar, who was speaking quietly with another Xylothian delegate. For the first time, John wondered if the talks were nothing more than a distraction, a way to buy time while the real plan unfolded elsewhere. When the session resumed, the atmosphere had shifted. John's questions became sharper, his tone less patient. "Let's talk specifics," he said firmly. "What exactly are your forces doing along the border right now?" Zillar's response was calm, almost dismissive. "Routine patrols, nothing more. You humans seem so quick to assume hostility." Emily watched closely, noting how Zillar avoided meeting John's gaze. There was something beneath his polished demeanor, something cold and calculating. She scribbled another note. "He knows." As the meeting stretched on, tensions mounted. John pushed harder, demanding transparency. Zillar countered with vague reassurances, his patience wearing thin. By the time the session ended, both sides were visibly frustrated. Later, as Emily walked with John back to their quarters, she voiced what they were both thinking. "Do you think they're planning to attack?" John didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and heavy. "I don't know. But if they are, we need to be ready. Far away, in the silence of space, the Tylothian ships continued their advance. The clock was ticking, and neither side knew how much time they had left. The calm that had settled over the neutral station was shattered in an instant. Alarms blared across the human fleet's communication channels, loud and urgent. Captain Laura Bennett stood on the bridge of the flagship, her hands gripping the edge of a console as she stared at the incoming data. A small convoy of human supply ships, tasked with delivering vital resources to the outer colonies, had been ambushed by Xylothian fighters. "Report," Admiral Ryan Mitchell barked, striding onto the bridge with his usual commanding presence. His sharp eyes scanned the displays showing the chaotic scene unfolding light years away. Laura turned to him, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Sir, it's bad. 3 supply ships are under attack. The Kylothians hit them hard and fast. Looks like they were trying to disable, not destroy. 2 ships are already crippled, and the 3rd is barely holding on." Mitchell's jaw tightened. This wasn't just an isolated incident. It was a message. The Tylothians were testing humanity's resolve, probing for weaknesses while keeping their options open. He clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "Any casualties?" "Minimal so far," Laura replied quickly. "But if we don't act soon, those ships won't last much longer." Mitchell hesitated. Every fiber of his being wanted to retaliate, to send a squadron of fighters to drive off the attackers and protect the convoy. But he knew the stakes. If he acted now without solid proof of the Silothians' broader intentions, it could derail the fragile peace talks. And yet, doing nothing felt equally dangerous. Back on the station, Emily Dawson sat in her quarters, staring at her communicator. News of the attack had spread quickly among the human delegation. She felt sick to her stomach, torn between anger and fear. Was this what Sailor had been stalling for? Had the talks been nothing more than a smokescreen? John Carter entered the room unannounced, his expression grim. "We need to talk," he said simply, closing the door behind him. Emily looked up, startled. "What do you think this means?" she asked before he could say anything else. John sighed and sank into a chair opposite her. "It means they're playing games. Testing us. Seeing how far they can push before we snap." "But why now?" Emily pressed. "Why risk everything when we're sitting here talking about peace?" "That's the question, isn't it?" John muttered darkly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I think they're trying to provoke us. Make us look like the aggressors. If we react too strongly, they'll use it as an excuse to escalate." Emily frowned, her mind racing. "So what do we do? Just sit here and let them attack our people?" "I don't know," John admitted, running a hand through his graying hair. "If we retaliate, we risk blowing up the talks entirely. But if we don't, they'll see it as weakness, and they'll keep pushing." As they spoke, whispers of betrayal rippled through the human delegation. Some argued that the Silothians couldn't be trusted, that the attack proved their true nature. Others urged caution, warning that jumping to conclusions could doom any chance of peace. The division grew deeper with each passing hour. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Mitchell finally made his decision. "Send a warning shot," he ordered. "Dispatch 2 squadrons to the area, not to engage, but to show force. Let them know we're watching." Laura nodded, relaying the command immediately. Moments later, human fighters streaked toward the site of the ambush, their engines glowing faintly against the blackness of space. The Azilothian attackers hesitated, clearly surprised by the sudden appearance of reinforcements. After a tense standoff, they withdrew, leaving the damaged supply ships behind. Though the immediate threat was neutralized, the fallout was inevitable. Back on the station, Zyler called for an emergency meeting, his tone icy. "Your actions today have jeopardized everything we've worked for," he accused, his translated voice dripping with disdain. "You claim to seek peace, yet you send warships to intimidate us." John tried to defend their position, but the damage was done. Trust, already fragile, began to crumble. Emily watched silently, her heart sinking. She had hoped for diplomacy to prevail, but now it seemed like war might be unavoidable. In the vast expanse of space, the human fleet remained on high alert. No one knew what the Xylothians would do next, or how far humanity would go to protect itself. Emily Dawson sat alone in the dimly lit conference room, her eyes scanning the documents spread across the table. The treaty draft lay open in front of her, its pages filled with dense legal jargon and carefully worded clauses. She had been tasked with reviewing it for any inconsistencies or red flags, but as she read deeper, a chilling realization began to take shape. Something wasn't right. Her pen hovered over a particular section buried near the end of the document, a clause granting the Xylothians unrestricted access to Earth's outer colonies under the guise of cultural exchange. At first glance, it seemed harmless enough, even reasonable. But Emily knew better. Those colonies were thinly defended, their populations vulnerable. If the Xylothians gained access, they could exploit the regions for resources, or worse, use them as staging grounds for an invasion. Her hands trembled slightly as she highlighted the passage and added a note in the margin. This is a trap. She couldn't shake the feeling that the entire treaty was designed to weaken humanity's defenses while buying time for the Xylothians to prepare their next move. John Carter found her still sitting there hours later, surrounded by papers and notes. His face softened when he saw the exhaustion etched into hers. "You've been at this all night," he said gently, pulling up a chair beside her. "I think I found something," Emily replied, her voice low but urgent. She slid the treaty draft toward him, pointing out the troubling clause. "If we sign this, we're handing them our weakest points on a silver platter." John's expression darkened as he read. He leaned back in his seat, rubbing his temples. "They must have thought we wouldn't catch it," he muttered. "Or maybe they didn't care. Either way, this changes everything." Meanwhile, aboard the human fleet, Admiral Rand Mitchell received an encrypted transmission from Emily detailing her discovery. As he read the report, his suspicions hardened into certainty. The Xylothians weren't negotiating in good faith. They were playing for time. And now, thanks to Emily's findings, he had proof. "This confirms it," Mitchell said aloud, turning to Captain Laura Bennett, who stood nearby. "They never intended to make peace." Laura nodded grimly. "What's our next move, sir?" Mitchell hesitated only briefly before making his decision. "We strike first." The order rippled through the fleet like a shockwave. Crew members scrambled to prepare for what would likely be the most critical operation of their lives. Weapons systems were brought online, engines warmed up, and coordinates plotted. The plan was clear. Hit key Xylothian outposts along the border, crippling their ability to launch a full-scale attack. It was a risky gamble, but Mitchell believed it was the only way to protect Earth's people. Back on the station, John struggled with how to handle the revelation. He wanted to confront Siller immediately, to expose the deception in front of everyone. But Emily stopped him, her voice firm despite her fatigue. "Not yet," she urged. "If we tip them off too soon, they'll know we're onto them. We need to wait until the fleet is ready." Reluctantly, John agreed. For now, they would continue pretending to negotiate, biding their time until the moment came to act. As the hours ticked by, tensions mounted. On the station, human delegates exchanged uneasy glances, sensing that something big was about to happen. Even the Xylothians seemed restless, their usually calm demeanor giving way to subtle signs of unease. Finally, the signal came. A single message from the fleet. "Operation begins in T-5 minutes." Admiral Mitchell gave the final order, his voice steady but resolute. "All ships, execute Plan Alpha. Engage." In the vast silence of space, the human fleet surged forward, catching the Xylothians completely off guard. Outposts erupted in flames as precision strikes disabled critical infrastructure. The element of surprise worked perfectly. The enemy forces were overwhelmed before they could mount a proper defense. On the station, John and Emily watched helplessly as chaos unfolded. Alarms blared, and Ziller stormed into the meeting room, his insect-like features twisted in fury. "You betrayed us." He spat, his translated voice shaking with rage. John met his gaze without flinching. "No," he said calmly. "You betrayed yourselves." For a moment, the room fell silent, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. Humanity had struck first, shattering any hope of peaceful resolution. War was here, whether anyone liked it or not. And in the cold expanse of space, the battle raged on. The human fleet moved with precision, each ship executing its role in the operation like a well-oiled machine. Explosions lit up the darkness of space as missiles struck Xylothian outposts, their defenses crumbling under the sudden assault. Admiral Ryan Mitchell stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the chaos unfold on the main screen. The strikes were devastatingly effective, crippling key installations and leaving the enemy reeling. But even as the initial wave of attacks succeeded, Mitchell couldn't shake the weight of what they had done. Striking first meant abandoning any pretense of diplomacy. It meant crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. He clenched his fists, staring at the fiery aftermath of one destroyed outpost. "Casualty reports?" he asked quietly, his voice cutting through the tense hum of activity on the bridge. Captain Laura Bennett hesitated before answering. "Minimal losses on our side, sir, but we're still gathering data on theirs." Mitchell nodded but said nothing. He knew the cost of war, knew that every life lost would haunt him. But there was no turning back now. The Xylothians had left them no choice. Still, the burden of command pressed down on him like a mountain. Back on the station, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Zyler's accusations echoed through the meeting room, his anger palpable. "This is an act of aggression," he declared, his translated voice sharp and biting. "You have betrayed the spirit of these talks, and your own species will pay the price." John Carter stood firm, refusing to back down. "We acted to protect ourselves," he shot back, his tone steady despite the storm brewing around him. "Your people gave us no reason to trust you. You think we didn't see your reinforcements, your plans to attack our colonies." Emily Dawson watched silently from the corner of the room, her heart pounding. She had known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier. The faces of the other delegates, both human and Xylothian, were etched with shock, fear, or outright hostility. The fragile bonds of negotiation had shattered completely, replaced by raw animosity. Zillar turned to Emily, his antennae twitching furiously. "And you," he said coldly. "Did you know about this? Did you help them plan it?" Emily straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I'm not part of the military," she replied evenly, "but I won't apologize for wanting to protect my people." The room erupted into heated arguments, voices overlapping in a cacophony of blame and defiance. Xylothian delegates accused humanity of treachery, while human representatives fired back with accusations of their own. John tried to restore order, raising his hands in a futile attempt to quiet the chaos. "Enough," he shouted finally, his voice cutting through the noise. "This isn't helping anyone. If you want to fight, go ahead, but don't pretend this is about justice." For a brief moment, silence fell. Zyler glared at John, his expression unreadable beneath his shimmering robes. Then, without another word, he turned and stormed out of the room, his fellow delegates following close behind. As the Xylothians left, Emily sank into a chair, her hands trembling. "What happens now?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. John sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "Now we brace for what comes next." This was just the beginning. Far away, the human fleet regrouped after the successful strikes. Ships drifted in formation, their crews tending to minor damages and preparing for the inevitable counterattack. Captain Laura Bennett approached Mitchell, her face grim. "Sir, we've intercepted communications from the Xylothian command. They're mobilizing everything they've got." Mitchell nodded, unsurprised. "How long until they reach us?" "Hours, maybe less," Laura replied. They're coming hard and fast. Then we hold the line, Mitchell said firmly. No matter the cost. The reality of their situation settled over the fleet like a shadow. They had dealt a heavy blow to the Tylothians, but the war was far from over. Every soldier, every pilot, every technician aboard those ships knew that the next battle would decide their fate. On the station, the remaining delegates began evacuating, boarding shuttles bound for safer locations. As Emily packed her notes and prepared to leave, she glanced one last time at the empty meeting room. The place where hope had once flickered, however briefly. Now, all that remained was ash and smoke. Outside, the stars burned brightly against the blackness of space. Somewhere among them, humanity's future hung in the balance. The aftermath of the human fleet's strike left a heavy silence in its wake. On the station, Emily Dawson stared out of a viewport at the distant stars, her mind racing. The initial rush of adrenaline had faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of guilt and uncertainty. What had they done? Yes, the Tylothians had been planning something. Emily was sure of it. But did that justify what humanity had unleashed? The lives lost, the trust shattered, the galaxy now teetering on the edge of full-blown war. John Carter found her standing there, arms crossed tightly over her chest, as if trying to hold herself together. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her and followed her gaze into the endless void. "You okay?" he finally asked, his voice soft but strained. Emily shook her head slightly. "No," she admitted. "I keep thinking about the talks, about how close we were to finding common ground, or at least I thought we were." John sighed, leaning against the wall. "It wasn't real, Emily. None of it was. They used those talks to buy time, and we almost fell for it." "I know," she said quietly, turning to face him. "But does that make this any better? We struck first, to them. And maybe even to some of our own people. We're no different now. Just another side in a war no one can win." John didn't have an answer. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her they'd done the right thing. But deep down, he wasn't so sure himself. Instead, he changed the subject. What happens next? With the treaty exposed and the fleet mobilized, where do we go from here? Emily hesitated, then spoke slowly. "We need to show the galaxy why we acted, why we had no choice. If we don't, everyone will see us as aggressors, including our allies." John nodded thoughtfully. "That's going to be harder than it sounds. The Tylothians won't sit back and let us spin this our way." "No," Emily agreed, "which is why we need proof. Something undeniable." Her words sparked an idea in John's mind. Zyler mentioned communications hubs during the talks, places where their leaders coordinate strategy. If we could get inside one. Emily caught his meaning immediately. "You're talking about infiltrating their systems, exposing their plans to the entire galaxy." "It's risky," John admitted. "But if anyone can pull it off, it's you." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. She knew what he was asking, and what it might cost. But she also knew he was right. If humanity stood any chance of surviving this war, they needed more than weapons. They needed truth. Meanwhile, aboard the human fleet, Admiral Ryan Mitchell faced mounting pressure from his crew. Captain Laura Bennett approached him cautiously, her expression unreadable. "Sir, morale is low," she said bluntly. "A lot of the men and women are questioning whether this fight is worth it." Mitchell turned to face her, his eyes tired but resolute. "They're scared, and they should be. This isn't going to be easy." "But do they believe in it?" Laura pressed. "Do you still believe in it?" For a moment, Mitchell didn't respond. Then he leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I believe in protecting our people. That's all that matters right now. If we lose sight of that, then everything we've done, all the sacrifices, will mean nothing." Laura nodded reluctantly. She understood his reasoning, even if she didn't fully agree. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the war was spiraling out of control, dragging humanity deeper into darkness with every passing day. Back on the station, preparations for evacuation were underway. Delegates packed their belongings, casting wary glances at one another as tension simmered just below the surface. Even among humans, cracks were beginning to form. Some argued that the fleet's actions were justified. Others whispered about betrayal and escalation. The unity that had once bound them together was fraying. As Emily boarded a shuttle bound for Earth, she glanced one last time at the neutral planet shrinking behind her. Somewhere beyond it, the human fleet braced for the Xylothian counterattack. And somewhere else entirely, Xylar and his kind plotted their revenge. War had begun, and there was no turning back. The plan was simple, too simple. Emily Dawson thought as she tightened the straps of her gear. She and Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, a pilot with sharp instincts and quicker reflexes, would slip behind enemy lines to infiltrate its Xylothian communications hub. Their mission was clear: find evidence of the Empire's true intentions and broadcast it to the galaxy. But nothing about this felt straightforward. Daniel stood nearby, checking the small shuttle they'd use for the mission. It was sleek and unmarked, designed to blend into the vastness of space without drawing attention. "Ready?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. Emily nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. "As ready as I'll ever be." They launched under the cover of darkness, their ship slipping past the edges of human-controlled space. The journey was tense, every blip on the radar making them flinch. They knew that if they were caught, there would be no second chances. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the engines and the occasional crackle of static from their scanners. As they approached the coordinates of the communications hub, Emily leaned forward, studying the display. The structure loomed ahead, a massive angular complex surrounded by smaller drones and patrol ships. Its surface shimmered faintly, reflecting the light of a distant star. "We need to land outside the perimeter," Daniel said quietly. "Too risky to get closer." Emily agreed. The shuttle touched down softly on a barren moon orbiting the hub, hidden in shadow. They suited up quickly, double-checking their equipment before stepping out into the cold void of space. With helmets sealed and oxygen flowing, they moved toward the hub, keeping low to avoid detection. Getting inside wasn't easy. The entrance was guarded by automated turrets programmed to fire at anything unfamiliar. Daniel took point, using a portable hacking device to disable the first line of defense. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, his hand steady despite the pressure. "Got it," he muttered finally, signaling Emily to follow him inside. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Strange symbols glowed softly on the walls, pulsing like living things. Emily recognized some of them, the same patterns she'd seen during negotiations. This place was central to the Xylothian war machine, a nerve center where orders flowed outward to the Empire's forces. "Over here," Emily whispered, spotting a terminal connected directly to the hub's mainframe. She plugged in her data pad, fingers flying over the keys as she searched for the files they needed. Minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly, each one feeling like an hour. Suddenly, alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the room, bathing everything in an eerie glow. "We've been spotted," Daniel shouted, pulling out his weapon. Xylothian guards swarmed into the chamber, their movements swift and precise. Daniel fired first, taking down two before retreating to cover Emily. "Hurry," he urged. "I'm almost done," Emily replied, her eyes locked on the screen. Finally, the files downloaded, a trove of encrypted messages detailing invasion plans, supply routes, and troop movements, proof enough to expose the Empire's lies. But escape wouldn't come easily. More guards poured in, surrounding them. Daniel fought valiantly, his shots finding their mark, but he couldn't hold them off forever. "Go," he yelled, shoving Emily toward the exit. "I'll hold them back." "No," Emily cried, hesitating. Leaving him meant certain death. "It's the only way," Daniel snapped, his voice breaking slightly. "Get that data out. Do your job." Tears blurred Emily's vision as she ran, clutching the data pad tightly. Behind her, the sounds of gunfire faded, replaced by silence. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Reaching the shuttle, she collapsed into the pilot's seat, her hands shaking as she powered up the engines. The comms crackled to life, filled with frantic voices searching for intruders. Ignoring them, she launched the craft, aiming for open space. As she fled, Emily replayed Daniel's final words in her mind. He had given his life so she could complete the mission. And now, the weight of that sacrifice rested solely on her shoulders. In the distance, the communications hub grew smaller, its glowing surface fading into the blackness of space. Somewhere beyond it, the human fleet awaited her return, and the truth she carried with her. Emily Dawson's shuttle streaked through the void, its engines roaring as she pushed it to the limit. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a reminder of what she had left behind, and what she carried with her. The data pad in her lap felt heavier than it should, its contents a lifeline for humanity. But getting it to safety was far from guaranteed. Behind her, Silothian fighters emerged from the shadow of the communications hub, their sleek forms cutting through space like knives. They were fast, relentless, and closing in. Emily glanced at the rear monitor, her breath catching as she saw their glowing engines drawing nearer. She adjusted course sharply, weaving between asteroids to throw them off, but they stayed on her tail. "Come on," she muttered under her breath, gripping the controls tighter. Just a little farther. Her communicator crackled to life, startling her. A voice came through, calm but urgent. It was Captain Laura Bennett. "Ms. Dawson, we're tracking your position. You've got company." "I noticed," Emily replied tersely, her eyes darting between the monitor and the controls. "Any chance of backup?" "We're scrambling a squadron now," Laura said, "but you'll need to hold them off until we get there." Emily swallowed hard. Hold them off. She wasn't a soldier. The thought of facing those fighters alone made her stomach churn, but she didn't have a choice. Pushing the shuttle harder, she zigzagged through the asteroid field, using the rocks as cover. Explosions lit up the darkness around her as enemy fire narrowly missed her hull. One shot clipped her wing, sending the shuttle spinning wildly. Emily fought to regain control, her hands slick with sweat. Alarms blared inside the cockpit, warning of damage to critical systems. "Not now," she hissed, stabilizing the craft just in time to dodge another volley. The human fleet loomed ahead, a distant cluster of ships glowing faintly against the blackness. Emily focused on it, willing herself closer. Behind her, the Silothian fighters split into two groups, one continuing the pursuit, the other veering off to intercept the approaching human squadron. "They're trying to cut us off." Laura's voice came through again. "Stay sharp." Emily gritted her teeth, pushing the shuttle beyond its limits. Her vision blurred as the G-forces pressed against her body, but she refused to give up. The human fleet grew larger, its ships now visible as distinct shapes against the stars. Just a little more. Suddenly, a bright flash erupted behind her. Turning quickly, she saw one of the Silothian fighters explode, debris scattering across space. Moments later, human fighters screamed past her shuttle, engaging the enemy with precision and ferocity. Relief washed over her, but she didn't slow down. Not yet. As she approached the flagship, the massive vessel opened its hangar bay, guiding her in with blinking lights. Emily guided the battered shuttle inside, her hands trembling as she set it down. The moment the engines powered down, she unbuckled herself and stumbled out, clutching the data pad tightly. Captain Laura Bennett was waiting for her, flanked by a team of soldiers. "Are you hurt?" Laura asked, her tone softening slightly. Emily shook her head, though her legs felt like jelly. "I'm fine. But Daniel didn't make it." Laura's expression darkened, but she nodded. "We'll mourn him later. Right now, we need that data." Emily handed over the data pad, her fingers brushing against Laura's briefly. "It's all there. Plans, orders, everything." enough to show the galaxy what they're really dealing with. Laura took the device and signaled for her team to escort Emily to medical. As they walked away, Emily glanced back at the hangar bay doors, now sealed shut. She thought about Daniel, his bravery, his sacrifice, and promised herself that his death wouldn't be in vain. On the bridge of the flagship, Admiral Ryan Mitchell watched as technicians uploaded the stolen files onto the main screen. His jaw tightened as he scanned the information. Invasion plans, timetables, lists of targeted colonies. It was damning evidence, undeniable proof of the Silothians' true intentions. "This changes everything," Mitchell said quietly, turning to Laura. "Get this broadcasted to every station, every colony, every ally we have. Let the galaxy see who we're fighting." Laura nodded, relaying the order immediately. Within minutes, the files were being transmitted across the stars, exposing the Silothian Empire's lies to the universe. Far away, Xyler and his leaders watched in stunned silence as their secrets unraveled before the eyes of the galaxy. For the first time, cracks began to form within their ranks. Some called for surrender, others demanded retaliation. But one thing was certain: the tide of public opinion had shifted. And in the cold expanse of space, humanity stood ready to face whatever came next. The broadcast of the stolen files sent shockwaves through the galaxy. News outlets, independent stations, and even rival species picked up the transmission, spreading the truth about the Silothian Empire's plans. The evidence was overwhelming: maps detailing invasion routes, orders targeting civilian colonies, and recordings of high-ranking officials discussing their strategies. Humanity's gamble had paid off, turning the tide of public opinion against the Silothians. On the flagship, Admiral Ryan Mitchell watched as reports flooded in from across the stars. Allies who had once been hesitant to support humanity now pledged their aid. Neutral factions condemned the Silothians, calling for accountability. Even within the Empire itself, dissent began to rise. Protests erupted on Silothian-controlled planets, with citizens demanding answers from their leaders. But Mitchell knew better than to celebrate too soon. "They're cornered," he said to Captain Laura Bennett, his voice low but firm. "And a cornered enemy is the most dangerous kind." Laura nodded, her expression grim. "Their fleet is mobilizing. Every ship they have is heading straight for us." "Then we hold the line," Mitchell replied, his jaw tightening. "No matter what it takes." Back on Earth, John Carter faced a different kind of storm. The United Earth Council convened an emergency session to address the crisis. Some members praised the human fleet's actions, hailing them as heroes who had exposed a grave threat. Others accused them of overstepping, arguing that the preemptive strike had escalated tensions unnecessarily. Emily Dawson sat quietly in the back of the chamber, her face pale but resolute. She had delivered the data that changed everything, yet she felt no sense of victory. The weight of Daniel's sacrifice hung heavy on her shoulders, a constant reminder of the cost of war. John stood at the center of the room, addressing the council. "This isn't about blame or pride," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. "It's about survival. If we don't stand together now, the Silothians will crush us and everyone else who opposes them." His words struck a chord. Slowly, the council began to unite, authorizing reinforcements and supplies for the fleet. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to keep hope alive. In space, the final battle loomed closer. The human fleet formed a defensive perimeter near the neutral planet where the talks had begun, a symbolic gesture meant to remind the galaxy of what had been lost. Ships bristled with weapons, their crews preparing for the fight of their lives. Admiral Mitchell paced the bridge, issuing commands and reviewing strategies. "We can't let them break through," he told his officers. "If they reach Earth, it's over." As the Silothian armada approached, the tension aboard the flagship became unbearable. Soldiers checked their gear one last time, exchanging nervous glances. Pilots climbed into their fighters, engines humming to life. Everyone knew this could be their last stand. The moment the enemy fleet entered range, chaos erupted. Missiles streaked across space, lighting up the darkness with fiery explosions. Fighters darted between larger ships, weaving through debris and trading fire. The human fleet fought valiantly, holding its ground against overwhelming odds. Captain Laura Bennett led a daring maneuver, guiding a squadron of bombers toward the Xylothian flagship. Its destruction would cripple their command structure, leaving the rest of the fleet disorganized. But reaching it wouldn't be easy. The ship was heavily guarded, its defenses formidable. "Stay close," Laura ordered her team as they dove into the fray. Enemy fighters swarmed around them, forcing them to split up. One by one, her squadron picked off the guards, inching closer to their target. Finally, they'd reached the flagship. Laura locked onto its core, launching a barrage of missiles. The impact was catastrophic, sending shockwaves through the Xylothian fleet. Their flagship exploded in a brilliant flash, scattering debris across space. For a moment, the battlefield fell silent. Then, slowly, the remaining Xylothian ships began to retreat, their formation broken. Cheers erupted aboard the human fleet, but Mitchell remained somber. This victory came at a cost, and the war was far from over. Far away, Xylar watched the destruction of his fleet with cold fury. His plans had unraveled, his empire teetering on the brink of collapse. But he refused to surrender. War, he vowed silently, was not done with them yet. The aftermath of the battle left a strange quiet in its wake. The human fleet drifted among the wreckage, their ships battered but intact. Fires still burned in the distance, consuming what remained of the Xylothian flagship and its escorts. For the first time in months, there was no immediate threat looming over them. But Admiral Ryan Mitchell knew better than to call it peace. On the bridge of his flagship, he stood staring at the stars, his mind heavy with the cost of victory. Casualty reports trickled in, hundreds of lives lost, countless ships damaged beyond repair. Among them were names he would never forget, including Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, whose bravery had made everything possible. "We won," Mitchell muttered under his breath, almost as if testing the words. But at what price? Captain Laura Bennett approached him cautiously, her face pale but determined. "Sir, we've secured the area. No sign of further enemy activity." Mitchell nodded slowly. "Good. Have the crews begin repairs immediately. We'll need to be ready for whatever comes next." Laura hesitated before speaking again. "Do you think this is over? With their flagship gone?" "It's not over," Mitchell interrupted, his voice firm. "Xylar is still out there. And so are those who follow him. This was a blow, but they won't give up easily." Far away, on a distant moon, Xylar watched the same stars that Mitchell did. His once imposing form seemed smaller now, his shimmering robes dulled by defeat. Around him, advisors whispered urgently, some calling for surrender, others urging retaliation. Xylar silenced them with a sharp gesture. "This isn't the end," he said coldly. "Humans have shown us their true nature. They will pay for this humiliation." Back on Earth, John Carter addressed the United Earth Council one final time. The chamber was quieter now, the arguments replaced by somber reflection. "We've exposed the truth," he began, his voice steady despite the exhaustion in his eyes. "But war doesn't end with victories or broadcasts. It ends when both sides choose to stop fighting, and I don't see that happening anytime soon." Emily Dawson sat in the back of the room, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She thought about Daniel, about the sacrifices made to bring them this far. She wanted to believe it was worth it, but the scars of war ran deep, not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts of everyone involved. As the council adjourned, John approached Emily. "You did good work," he said softly. "What happens next? It's out of our hands." Emily nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. "I just hope it means something," she replied quietly. "That all this pain leads somewhere better." Across the galaxy, reactions to the broadcast continued to ripple outward. Some species offered aid to humanity, grateful for exposing the Xylothian threat. Others retreated into isolation, unwilling to take sides in a conflict that showed no signs of ending. Within the Xylothian Empire itself, cracks widened. Rebels rose against their leaders, demanding change. Factions splintered, each blaming the other for failure. Admiral Mitchell gazed at the map of contested space displayed on the flagship's screen. Borders shifted, alliances fractured, and new fronts emerged. The war was changing shape, becoming something larger and more unpredictable. Yet, amid the chaos, small acts of hope began to surface. Refugees found shelter on neutral planets. Scientists shared technology to rebuild destroyed colonies. Artists painted murals commemorating those who had fallen, vowing never to forget their sacrifice. One evening, Emily stepped outside her home, breathing in the cool night air. The sky above glimmered with countless stars, each one a reminder of how vast and fragile the universe truly was. She thought about the choices humanity had made, the battles fought, and the lives lost. Peace felt impossibly far away, but she clung to the belief that it was still possible. In the silence of space, the human fleet regrouped, ready to face whatever came next. War had taken much from them, but it hadn't taken everything. Somewhere beyond the wreckage and the ruins, a future waited, one they would fight to build, no matter how long it took. And so, beneath the endless expanse of stars, humanity carried on, holding fast to the fragile dream of peace.